Joining us, Punchbowl News co-founder and MS Now political contributor Jake Sherman and professor of law at Hofstra University, James Sample. Glenn Thrush from the New York Times is going to join us in just a moment. So, Jake, just a few minutes ago, Senator John Thune assured folks that Todd Blanche called him and that the White House is going to be very clear, and the statements he's going to make about the weaponization fund is going to be definitive. What else can you tell us?
Well, we'll have to see what Blanche says. It would have to be very definitive. We will not pursue this ever, basically, and I'm not even sure that will do it. And remember, Katie, there's a couple steps here, right? This is all about the reconciliation bill that would fund ICE and CBP. They've been unfunded for a long time, running on different pots of cash. ICE and CBP under this bill that they're considering would be funded through Trump's presidency, so for 3 or so years. It is a reconciliation bill, so anyone could offer unlimited amendments on this bill for basically an unlimited period of time. So even if Blanche says that today in his hearing, even if Republicans are persuaded that he's not going to open this weaponization fund, Democrats can still and will still offer an amendment saying the Justice Department can never start a weaponization fund, most likely if the bill is constructed as we see it right now, which has what we call a justice title, which basically includes funding for the Justice Department. Then Democrats could offer that amendment. If they somehow get rid of that title, it would be more difficult. The answer is, Katie, we're going to have to see what Blanche says. This is not an administration that at this point in its life cycle, this close to what is expected to be a bruising midterm election, not an administration that engenders a lot of just natural trust with Senate Republicans. So we're going to have to see what Blanche says in about an hour or so.
So what happened on the Hill today? I mean, this news about the weaponization fund being pulled broke yesterday while you were on the show with me, and you talked about a lot of this, that, Republicans wanted much more clarity on it being pulled. It's been 24 hours now. There was the Senate luncheon today. What happened inside that room?
Yeah, so John Thune, here's the problem, Katie. At a certain point, a congressional leader needs to stop thinking and act. And I think that's what John Thune is trying to do. He has a problem in front of him, which is ICE and CBP need to be funded, and he needs to move a bill to do so. So at some point, he just has to put it on the floor and let the chips fall as they may. He needs to get 51 to advance the bill, to get onto the bill and start the process. He is hoping that enough Republicans will take a leap of faith with him to start this process and get going on this bill. And he has basically told, his leadership team has effectively told Senate Republicans that they need to go on the floor and they need to raise any concerns if they are not going to be with him in starting this process. So he has said that he spoke to the acting attorney general and got some assurances that they're not going to start this fund. So we're going to have to see what he says, and we're going to have to see where the votes fall. But it would not surprise me if there are a number of Republicans who vote with Democrats to make doubly sure that the Justice Department cannot change its mind after this bill is passed, because that is something, I mean, look at what's happened in this administration. Robert F. Kennedy came up here for his confirmation hearing, got confirmed, said one thing in the confirmation process, did something completely different when he got in office. I mean, we've seen this across the administration. So they're going to want, I wouldn't be surprised if they're going to want to make sure that the Justice Department isn't going to take a similar tact after this bill is passed.
No new foreign wars. We're in a war with Iran.
Right,
I mean,
exactly.
No
same
January
kind
6ers who were violent against police officers are going to get pardoned. They were all pardoned. Yep. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. I want to come back to you on the IRS stuff in a second, but let's talk more about the weaponization fund for a moment. It's not just Congress that's in on this to try to get it stopped. The courts might stop it as well. Where does that stand?
Yeah, well, I mean, the courts, let's be clear, the retreat here is a pause, and it's a pause based on court order from Virginia and another court proceeding in Florida. Complying with a court order is the constitutional floor. It's not a noble act. It's not a tactical retreat. It's
you don't get a pat on the back.
You don't get a gold star for complying with a court order.
Yeah.
And yet that's essentially the posture. There's this kind of passive-aggressive tone to the release yesterday. We will abide by the court order. And the president tells John Carl of ABC that, for now, he says, that, at this moment, we're stuck because of the court. The phrase "at this moment" is doing a lot of work there. And I think to Jake's point, there are two different battles here about the same fund. There is the short-term reconciliation bill aspect, and there is the longer-term, is this a continuing, enduring guarantee? And the other part of this is that the fund gets the headlines, and appropriately so. But let's be clear, Katie, the audit shield, that's the heist.
Yeah.
When the president writes himself out of the tax code in legal language, that's called an emolument.
How can you do that?
You can't do it. That's an emolument. It is a benefit beyond salary. And that is constitutional.
He's arguing it's part of a settlement. They illegally obtained his taxes, and it was hundreds of others as well, by the way. And the guy was a contractor. He's been prosecuted, serving, I think, 5 years. Mm-hmm. So he's been punished. But, he sued the government because the government did do something bad to him with this guy. Can he not get a settlement that allows him immunity from audit? Is that not cool?
That's not
what would be an appropriate settlement?
It's not a thing, and it's not a thing particularly when you control both sides of the V.
Yeah.
He said it himself. He said,
he could have brought it while he was a citizen.
He could have brought it before, and and at that point, he would have been within the statute of limitations. Look, there are a lot of reasons not to rob a bank. Most people don't rob a bank because it's the wrong thing to do. The president and his allies here are deciding not to rob a bank because they went in and they saw the guards, in this case, the judges, were not asleep. So they're saying, we're not going to rob this bank today. They're not saying we're never going to rob a bank. We're not saying they're never going to rob another bank. They're saying, for now, we're not going to rob this bank. And by the way, you, the American taxpayer, are the ones who have the money in that bank.
So the audit thing, the self-dealing on the audit thing, the protectionism that Donald Trump has awarded himself from the IRS. The New York Times, Jake, was reporting that it could save him $100 million on some tax liabilities. Is Congress upset about that? Are Republicans looking at that and saying, I don't want to have to campaign on this or against this either? Is this part of the frustration and the anger that they're feeling toward this fund?
Not as acutely as the fund, which is just what a lot of Republicans think. And your point on the IRS stuff is right. But the fund is really easy to explain. And I guess the IRS stuff is too. But $1.8 billion for people who feel like the government targeted them at a time where people are struggling is not something that is going to fly. It's just not. It's not something that you want to go out and explain on the campaign trail if you're asked about that. And it fits in, all of this fits into a larger pattern of just not all the things that we talk about all the time, that Trump is just seemingly does not care about his political party's standing in any way, shape, or form. Whether it's the ballroom, security for the ballroom, the fund, the war, just not saying he doesn't care about what people are paying for gas. He doesn't really care about the midterms. It's just a stunning kind of number of political statements that would have been unheard of in any other administration. It fits into an overall picture. But no, they're not talking about that as much. But I'll tell you what, Katie. If Democrats take the House, and I find myself saying this a lot recently, if Democrats take the House, they are going to have a lot of things, A, to investigate, and B, to talk about when they get into negotiations with Trump over things that he wants legislatively. It's going to be a whole new world.
There's a question of whether he's ever going to want anything legislatively again. He barely wants anything now. He's trying to do executive orders.
He has to keep the government open. There are always things that the president, although less so because the presidents have expanded their power in recent years with little intervention from Congress, but there are always things that administrations need from Congress. And I assume that will be the case from 2027 to 2029 as well.
All right, let's bring in New York Times D.C. correspondent covering the Justice Department, Glenn Thrush, as promised. Glenn, you were working on some news. Can you share it with us?
No, it's just, I think, the stuff you're probably aware of, that Todd Blanche called John Thune and apparently gave him some assurances, as I'm sure Jake probably had before the call actually happened, probably. God, he was annoying to work with, but that's another story. No, but I think what's going on right now is you have a Senate, as I think Jake put very, very well. You have a Senate that is diverging in terms of his interests from Trump's interests, which are Trump, basically. He has one interest. So you have a situation, I think, in which this was such an extraordinary breach of ethical and legal guardrails that also presented them with a tremendous political problem. And then the other thing, as you guys well know, is John Cornyn's loss, I think, was a psychic shock for a lot of people in the Senate. I think while, obviously, even with Tallarico's surge, the Republicans are favored to keep Texas. Cornyn was one of them. And I think there was a real sense of that Trump stepped over a line by weighing in for Paxton. So that gives them even less incentive to want to have his back on something that they think is reprehensible. This is just a disaster from start to finish. And, my end of this equation is Todd Blanche, who's about to testify before the House Appropriations Committee, and for, I think, probably the better part of a year, the general sense inside the Justice Department was that Blanche was attempting to play some sort of a moderating force, that he was attempting to assuage Trump. And we heard that Blanche opposed in principle the notion of this fund. He signed off on it because he thought it was legally defensible. But I don't think you can make that argument anymore. I think Todd Blanche is in it 100% and has become somebody who is just willing to do whatever Trump
What
asks
about the
him to do.
IRS